So it's December 21st here in South Georgia. It is about 11 a.m. and it's about 75 degrees, projecting a high of about 82 degrees. I love winter in South Georgia. Today's project, we have to replace the brake pads on my wife's Kia Sedona minivan. So let's get to it. So today we're changing the brakes on my wife's 2006 Kia Sedona minivan. Her front brake pads are shot, so we're going to change them out. First thing we have to do, obviously, is take off the front tire. We get the car jacked up, take off the tire. And then on the back here, right here, and down at the bottom over here are the two bolts that holds the brake system on. So we need to take those out. And we're going to take off this whole caliper assembly. So let me get that done and we'll be right back. So I got the two bolts that holds this frame out, but I can't get the whole assembly off. Just normal wear on this rotor. There's a little lip that formed right here on the edge, and it's catching the brake pads and keeping this whole assembly from sliding off. So what I'm going to do is take out this bolt, and there's one right around here. That way I can slide this caliper assembly off, and that'll release the pressure on the pads, and then I can take the pad frame off, replace the pads, and push the cylinders back into the caliper assembly. So let's get that done. So we've got the calipers off. They're here. We got our brake pad frame here, and you can tell those pads are done for. Yeah, I really wish you'd said something to me earlier, but anyway, we still got smooth surface on our rotor, so I think we're okay with those. I don't think those need to be replaced. It wouldn't hurt, but I don't think we need to replace them. So what we have to do is take out these pads, just snap them out, and snap in some new ones. Now, snapping in the new ones isn't something I can do with one hand and hold this camera, so I'm just going to snap them in, and we'll be right back. When you get your pads, of course there's going to be four because you get a set for the front. There's going to be four pads, but you need to take care to put them on the right side. Now, you notice two of these pads have these little clips. These are the squeakers. And what happens is when the pads wear down to this point, this little piece of metal starts scraping on the rotor and causing the brakes to squeal. And that's your indication that your pads need to be changed. Now, that squeaker needs to go on the front side of the pad, so when the wheel's going forward, it squeaks. And it goes on the outside. So we need to be sure that we pick a set of pads that go that way. So, for instance, this pad with this squeaker, with the right curvature, if the squeaker's on the outside, it's at the back. So this is actually the front pad, the pad for the other side of the car. And there's its match. So we'll set those aside. That's for the other side. This pad, here's the squeaker with the curvature. Squeaker's going to be on the front, so this is the one we need for this side, along with this matching pad. Have our pads back in the frame here. They just slide into these little slots right here on each side. And you don't want to push them too far together. Just get them started in the slot from the back side and from the front side. Leave plenty of space between them because they have to go back over that rotor. And so what we have to do next is we can go ahead and put this frame back on. Those first two bolts that we took out, we slide it back over, put the make sure the pads are on each side of the rotor, bolt this thing back on. Then what we have to do is we have to push those pistons back into that caliper, and we can put the caliper back on. We have our brake pad frame bolted back. Now the next thing we have to do, these two pistons, when you push the pedal, this is what actually pushes against the brake pads and causes your car to stop. The problem is, as the pads wear, these pistons push further and further out. And now there's not enough room here to slide the calipers back over the new, thicker pads. So what you can do is loosen up the bleed screw and push the pistons back in. But you're going to lose brake fluid that way. You're going to have to refill the fluid. You may have to bleed the brakes. I don't know. I don't do it that way. Give me a piece of metal. And a giant C-clamp. And what I'm going to do is clamp here and on the back of the calipers and just crank and squeeze and push these pistons back into the calipers, and it'll push the fluid back through the hoses back into the system. You don't lose a drop of fluid. You don't open the system up, so you're definitely not going to get air in the system, so you're not going to have to bleed the brakes. And this really is the quickest way I've ever found to do this. The only vehicle that I've ever had trouble doing this with was my wife had a Hyundai Santa Fe, and her car and my mom had a Cadillac Sedan DeVille at one time. Both of those vehicles had calipers that had a little X across them. They were flat, they had a little X grooved in them, and you actually had to twist those calipers as you pressed them to be able to get them to go back in. You couldn't just squeeze them back in, it wouldn't work. Those were the most difficult to do this way. Those are the ones that I would suggest just cracking the bleed screw and doing it that way. Pushing on it without cracking the bleed screw, you're pushing a lot of pressure. You're having to push all this pressure back up in through the master cylinder, and it's fine, it's not going to hurt anything. But with these, there's no issue. You don't have to twist these, they'll just squeeze right back in. So metal across, C-clamp, and so just for reference, you can see how far these are sticking out here. So I'll come back in a minute and I'll show you where we're at after we squeeze them back into the caliper. And 30 seconds later, here we are. Calipers are now, pistons are now flush with the caliper frame, and we can proceed to slide them back over the pads here, put the bolts back in, and bolt the calipers back. So there we are. Caliper bolted back, frame bolted back. Make sure all your bolts are tight, and repeat the same process on the other side. Now the only thing you have to remember after doing this, because we squeeze those pistons back up into that caliper, they're not actually touching the pads. There's nothing actually squeezing the pads against this rotor. So when you start the car, before you move it, after you finish this on both sides, before you move this vehicle, before you put it in drive, before you put it in reverse, before you move it, you be sure you pump that brake pedal until you feel resistance. Because sometimes you can pump it 4, 5, 6 times before the pads, before the pistons work their way back out of the caliper and start squeezing those pads against that rotor. And if you're moving, that 4, 5, 6 pumps can feel like it takes a half an hour. Trust me. I speak from experience. I did move a vehicle before pumping the brakes one time, just had a brain fart. And it was scary because I hit the brakes and nothing happened. And I hit them 4, 5, 6 more times, nothing happened. About the 7th or 8th pump, the brakes finally caught. So make sure you pump the brakes back up before you move the vehicle. But we're just going to repeat the process on the other side, and we're going to be done. And this whole process took me about 20 minutes. Should take about 15 minutes on each side if you're not filming it for YouTube. But that's it. That's how you change the brakes on a 06 Kia Sedona. And this process, I use the exact same process on my 03 Silverado HD pickup. Most vehicles, you can do the brakes this way. So there you go. Have a good day.